Hi, so this is my Module 2 note-taking guides, my response to Nico's Module 2 note-taking guides, and then note-taking guide, and then it is my reflection on the disciplinary literacy assessment, the two quotes that I found, and my literacy history discussion contribution, which I could have sworn I could have sworn I answered that. But I think I'm getting it confused with a similar assignment that we did for one of my other classes. So that's what this is. Also, I'm looking down at my notes, and then I'm also kind of sometimes looking up at my computer just to make sure I'm not forgetting or missing anything. So if I'm not looking at the camera, that's why. So the first, also, if I can't read my handwriting, I apologize. I kind of shorthanded it and wrote quickly, and sometimes I can't tell what I said. So the first reading in the Module 2 note-taking guide is assessing the other. So the first important note that I've talked about is kind of talking about who is the other. We have to look at affect, and I think it's called conation. I think that's how you say it. Affect is basically a person's like physical response to emotion. So it's like their visible emotions. It's what we observe when students react to a certain thing. That's what we're observing. And then conation is a desire to act with purpose. So these two work together to kind of create the way a student responds to stimuli around them and whatever. We observe that, and we tend to care about the combination of those two in all aspects of our teaching, usually except assessment. Assessment kind of leaves that emotion and that desire to act with purpose out of the equation. So that's the first thing. The second one is student choice is absolutely necessary when it comes to helping students build an identity as a reader. My next one, which is kind of similar, it says, in addition to student choice, it is so important that we help our students create a positive attitude toward reading. This will help with lots of things if they have a positive attitude toward reading, and it's kind of discussed. I mean, I honestly feel like that is an important theme throughout the entire course, not just this reading and not just that section of the reading, but in general, I think it's so important that students view reading through a positive lens and not through a burdened, annoyed, whatever lens. And then finally, I said past experiences, especially with grades. So yeah, students' past experiences, especially as it relates to grades, will almost always impact how they view reading tasks and successes and failures in the future. If a student is constantly told that, oh, you got a D on this reading assignment, you got an F on this reading assignment, you got a C- on this reading assignment, they're going to start to feel like, you know what, reading's not for me, and school keeps telling me that. And so that's a really big issue that, especially as secondary teachers, I'm a middle school teacher, 7th and 8th grade, that's something that, like, I really need to pay attention to and think, like, okay, so, you know, these young kids, 12 and 13-year-olds, have been constantly told that they're not good enough to read, they're only worth C's at the highest. Of course they're not going to want to read in my classroom, they're just expecting to fail. So that is another thing that the article mentioned. Something that I really want to incorporate in my classroom is choice reading. That's not really something that we do too much in my current CT's room at my site school. In my classroom, there's not very much choice reading, and I mean, part of that is because we only have 50 minute classes, and it's really hard to get stuff done in that time. And when we have, you know, district power standards and then all the other things that we need to do, choice reading kind of, it's like, you know, we don't have time. If we had longer class times, then maybe we could do it, but I really want to make sure that I somehow incorporate choice reading into my classrooms. And I have two questions. One of them is more of like a not philosophical, but open-ended question, and one of them is a review question. So my open-ended question is, how can I help students kind of create that positive view of reading that I discussed earlier? How can I help students create that view of reading who have constantly been told that reading isn't for them? What are some steps that I can take, either tangible or not, that can help them kind of get past that? I guess my answer to that, one thing that I can think of, is to just like tell students at the very beginning. I mean, this isn't super helpful, but it's the only thing that I can think of right now, is just remind students when they first come into my classroom or when I first go into their classroom, depending on what the situation is, remind them that, like, whatever their past grades are, whatever their past teachers have said about them, like, I don't care, you know? Like, I mean, I care about who they are. I don't care about what their grades are. I don't care about the mistakes that they've made in the past. I don't care about the things that they've said in the past that maybe got them in trouble or that impacted their GPA or what. I don't care about that. I care about who they are right now in my classroom. So that could be like a little thing. And then my review question is, what is one way to help address the sort of like other in my classroom, especially in a diverse classroom, which this program is preparing us for, and that's what I really, really hope to teach, is in a diverse classroom. So what can I do to do that? What's one step? And I would say, again, providing choice reading so that students can read what they're interested in is a really good way to do that. Okay. The next reading that we did is the assessment of students and textbooks. So a couple notes that I gathered here. There are two purposes of assessing. Formative assessment is, I think, formative and forming. So formative is helping, it's like as we go, as we learn. I'm doing small little assessments, won't really affect my students' grades, so that I can get an idea what my students are learning. They can get an idea what they should be continuing to learn. Although hopefully I'm explaining that clearly in learning objectives and whatnot. But so formative assessment, and then the other one is summative assessment. And I think summative, and then like summarizing, so or summary. So the summative assessment is essentially it's kind of taking a step back. It's a more formal, not formative, formal assessment. Maybe not traditional necessarily. It could be a project, it could be a speech, it could be, there's tons of different ways you can do a summative assessment, but it's to see, did my students understand everything that I expected them to learn? And it's kind of like, it's an overarching summary of what they learned, and then assessing that, and then that also helps me then in the future, like, are my students getting this? But again, formative assessments can help with that part. There are 5 main assessment practices, very generally. They are that assessments should draw on multiple sources of information, useful information for both, assessments should produce useful information for both students and teachers. Assessments should provide optimal conditions for showing students' capabilities. So there should be different ways for students to show their learning. It should involve students in the self-assessment realm. And then finally, it admits the potential of fallibility. Yes. Another important thing that I took away is it's kind of like reminders, I guess, or like tips to be aware of cultural biases. And so 2 things that they suggested, 4 things. 2 of the things they suggested is including or considering linguistic biases, linguistic biases when creating assessments. So do my students understand the English that I'm using? Do they have the grammar skills? Am I creating an accessible assessment, basically? And then content and conceptual biases. Don't know why I wrote that. And then finally, this is not a direct quote, but it says, I wrote, grades suck, but they're a reality. And so that's one of the things that they talked about for a while. It was like, yeah, like grades, like the grading system isn't great, and it's unfortunate that we have to do that, but it's a reality that teachers face. And they were right, you know, that a lot of literacy theory, teacher readings, whatever, kind of just avoid the idea of grades altogether, but that isn't feasible in a lot of cases. So they kind of propose a teaching, I guess, method, which is tough but fair. And that sort of tough but fair component includes selecting things that, so like things meaning assignments, assessments, discussions, etc., that reflect what I value as a teacher. So making sure that I think it's important. If I don't think it's important, why am I having my students do it? Providing a variety of opportunities for students to earn credit. Like for me, I'm really bad at multiple choice tests. I just am. Like, they are not my forte, so there should be the class shouldn't solely be multiple choice exams. Or shouldn't just be essay exams, or shouldn't just be drawing posters. I don't know. There should be a clear grading system. Students should know what my grading system is, and I should adhere to that every single time I grade. And then finally, I think there was one other, but the last one that I wrote is I should collaborate with students to set and achieve goals. So they should, right, because if they're the ones learning it and they're the ones demonstrating their learning, they should be able to kind of help say, like, yeah, like, these are the things we should be learning, and this is how we want to show that learning. So getting them involved in that discussion. In my classroom, a couple things that I want to do is, again, similar to the last one, but I want to allow choice and assessment. I taught last semester at a Catholic school. It was a really great experience, and I remember the most successful assignment I did, we read Esperanza Rising. I don't know if you've read that. It's a great story. It was it was my way to sneak in social justice in a school which does not allow anything like that, so that was good. But we read Esperanza Rising, and the final project that I did is students got to pick between, like, some students, they created a cookbook and they referenced different parts of the book that related to those recipes and, like, why they were important, or creating a comic strip, or creating a series, like an advertisement campaign, just tons of different things to demonstrate that they understood and that they gained knowledge from Esperanza Rising. And I think that choice and assessment was really, really successful, so I want to continue doing that. And then finally, I want to have some sort of, like, grading system, or, like, my grading philosophy, I guess, put into, like, kid language and have it sort of easily accessible, if that means on display in my classroom, or we stick it in the front page of a binder and the students constantly have their binders with them every day, or we tape it to the desk. I don't know, but I want students to always have access to my grading system and always know what it is I'm looking for. And then 2 questions again. I did one more, like, theoretical, I guess, question, and one kind of review question. So my theoretical question is, it says, all of this is great, and I wrote all of this is great and yay for grade acknowledgement. So it's good that they wrote everything. It's nice to finally have an article address, like, the reality of grades. I said, but what do I do about standardized tests? Because that's still a reality, and that's still really challenging for me to kind of figure out, like, I have to do it, so what do I do about that? And then my review question would be, what does tough but fair mean? And tough but fair, I would say, means students are expected to learn. I have high expectations of my students, which, again, they help me create, but students all have a fair and equal chance, and I guess maybe equitable chance at learning and achieving high grades. So then the next part of the note-taking guide is about the close assessment. I'm going to be honest, I had a really hard time with that. So the close assessment, it probably took me about 10 minutes. Some strategies that I used, I had to really, really slow down. There was one point where I remember it was right before the part about the economic collapse in the 1980s or something like that. But it was right before that one. But it was like, yeah, I don't know. I really struggled. And I had, in my brain, I added in the correct word and then the blank. So it was like, I was having such a hard time figuring out the blank, but the blank that I needed, I had already accidentally added in because I was going too quickly. So I needed to slow down. I needed to reread is number 2. I needed to do a lot of rereading, and then I needed to draw on my background knowledge. What can we learn about our students as readers? I said one thing we can learn about is their vocabulary level. Something that excuse me, I have the hiccup. Something that I discovered about the close assessment is that I feel like there could be, like, depending on what words are taken out, there could be alternative words, you know? If the word taken out is incredible, students could put in the word good, which, depending on the sentence, might still be appropriate, you know, or maybe they say amazing instead of incredible. It might still be appropriate, but it doesn't have it doesn't demonstrate quite as high of a vocabulary knowledge base. And then I said their knowledge of grammar, same sort of thing, and then their ability in making inferences, and their comfort in making inferences. Apparently mine is very low. I was very nervous that I would get everything wrong, and then I panicked, and then I just didn't do well. So there's that. And then two useful, I think it was like two things that we could, like, that are useful, that this information can be used for planning units and lessons. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what the question was, I think. Kind of like that. I said, so one thing that I said is, like, what are some things that I can incorporate into my units? So, for example, again, if I notice that it seems like a lot of my students are perhaps making very safe inferences, or they're very hesitant, or if we do, like, a reflection afterwards, like, how did that go? You know, what's something that you struggled with? What's something that you thought you did a good job at? And I feel I learned that, like, okay, they struggle with making inferences, then in my unit, I can incorporate practicing making inferences and predictions. So that's one thing. And then another thing is, are my students understanding the content that I'm teaching? So kind of using the closed assessment as a formative assessment, just to check, like, okay, like, we've been talking about the history of baseball. I'm an English teacher, but we've been talking about the history of baseball for the past 3 weeks. Or I guess, let's do this. We've been talking about baseball for the past 1 week. And particularly, we've been talking about the 2 most famous baseball players. I don't know who they are. And I create a closed assessment using one of the readings that we've read. Are my students understanding the content, or are they, like, totally off base? And that'll help me figure out, like, okay, like, I need to go back and how can I do a better job at teaching for content in addition to teaching for other things too. Okay, so that was the close reflection. The five of the literacy interview questions that I used were, how do you feel about reading? When you read, what do you think about? What do you do when you get to a word you don't know? What is your favorite book? And where do you get your reading materials from? 2 practices that I want to use in my classroom would be incorporating choice books into either a daily or a weekly routine. So choice books, and then independent reading is associated with that. And then the second one would be allow students access to many different types of books that might pique their interest. So not just having fiction, not just having nonfiction, but maybe also having anime, maybe having manga, maybe having poetry, maybe having a variety of reading levels. I don't want just science fiction. I also want historical fiction. I want realistic fiction. I want social justice, things like that. Yeah, and then the last part was talk about one thing that, or one resource that I looked into. So I looked into the Shunk, sorry, I don't know how to say either of these names, and Di Benedetto 2016 article, particularly on the chapter called Social Cognitive Theory, Self-Efficacy, and Students with Disabilities. And I just thought that this was a very good chapter for people who are interested in learning about, so first of all, like, what self-efficacy is, right? And we that was in the articles, but talking about, like, how do students view themselves as readers, and how do students view reading, and how does a self-image come into that play? And then especially in particular students with disabilities, and how are students with disabilities represented when we talk about things like that. My response to Nico. So an interesting thing that he shared many quotes, which I thought was good. One of the quotes that he shared was, self-concept can influence what, when, and how we read. And I think that is a true statement, and I think it was good that he shared that, because again, it kind of goes back to what I was just saying, is like the way I view myself, and I talked about this earlier too, like, you know, if I feel like I'm constantly being told like, nope, your reading grade was only a C, your reading grade is a D, you need to do better, you need to try harder, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, I am trying hard, like I am reading, I'm just not good at it yet. Or like I'm not good at it yet, but just like I'm not where some of my peers are, you know, that makes me not want to read. And vice versa. If I'm really confident in myself as a reader, then I'm going to want to read more often. Unfortunately for me, I've never been a confident reader. After like 3rd grade, I stopped being a confident reader, and that's still true today. I almost never read for fun, which I know is a bad habit that I need to get out of. I'm a horrible example as do as I say, not as I do, but that's where I am, and I'm still working on that. So that was an interesting thing that he shared. And a piece of information that I felt like he didn't mention, but I thought was really important, is again that idea in the assessing others reading, about actually, I'm sorry, it was not in the assessing others, it was the assessment of students in textbooks, about the grading, and that we can't okay, so yeah, he didn't talk much about the gradings, which I talked about, but just again that it is a reality that we have to face, but what are some ways that we can kind of avoid getting into that grading students and like saying like, you're worth a C, you're worth a B, great job, you're worth an A, oh, you're worth a D, you know, instead of doing that, what are some ways we can get around that? And he didn't talk about that, but I do think it is an important thing to consider. A question he asked is, how can we as teachers do a better job at implementing assessments as a substantive, I don't know, tool to educate and improve instruction? I'd say that very generally, one thing that we can do is really go heavy on formative assessments. My mom's a high school English teacher, and I've always heard her talk about like, oh, formative, oh, summative, and it never really dawned on me like what the difference was, and my teachers never used those words. And then I was reading a book for John McDermott's class, and it was talking about formative and summative, and I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. I'm really into the idea of formative assessments to just check, like, how are my students doing? Am I teaching them what I want them, like, are they learning what I want them to learn? And am I teaching them in a way that can help them get there? So I'd say that one thing that we can do, and we can use formative assessments to really, if we go heavy on those, then we can really know kind of what's going on in our students' learning brains. And then finally, Nico wants to implement forming in his classroom, especially for his ELL students. Okay, so that's the end of the Module 2 note-taking guide stuff. This next bit will briefly go into kind of some of the other Module 2 things that I have missed. So the literacy history. Again, I could have sworn I turned this in. Sorry that I didn't. So the event is it's not one particular event. It's like lots of the same things spread over time. And that is the constant, I guess, reminder, or like the constant statement that my family and teachers would make. And they'd all say, I bet you're going to be an English teacher when you grow up. Oh, I hated that. I mean, it's ironic because I am now, but I hated that because I felt like, okay, now I need to be the best. And like, I felt a lot of pressure to be the best reader, to be the strongest reader, to read the most, and I wasn't reading the most. I was never reading. My parents, they really encouraged my brother and I to do a lot of reading. We read as a family, we read on our own, we made special trips to the library. I've always had access to books. I've always had access to literature. Like, it's not like my parents didn't encourage me to read, or my teachers, but it's like, it got to a point where it was like, you're going to be an English teacher. I bet you're going to be an English teacher. Oh, you're really good at writing. I bet you're going to be an English teacher. And I hated that because I didn't want to be an English teacher and I didn't like reading. And after a while, there was so much pressure on me to be the best reader and to do a bunch of reading. And that wasn't even what they said. They didn't even say, you need to be the best reader. That's just how I interpreted it. But a reading that kind of makes me think of is the Read Aside article. Like, I've definitely fallen victim to Read Aside, and as I mentioned 3 minutes ago, like, I'm still experiencing the repercussions of that. I still don't love reading. If I can do something else, I will. And then finally, the 2 quotes that I found for the discipline, well, I'll go quote, reflection. So the first quote for the disciplinary literacy assessment is, if selecting fictional text in the English or language arts, be sure that the text you select allows you to ask the kinds of questions important to comprehension of fiction. And I think that's important because it's very easy to just think like, okay, this is a fun article, or like, this is a fun short story, or this is a fun paragraph, and blah, 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 but it doesn't really get into like comprehension necessarily. Just maybe there's not enough depth to it, or maybe there's so much depth that like my students are like, whoa, what? So just being sure that I'm picking a good, balanced, but interesting piece of fiction or literature that students are able to understand, and that I'm able to ask reasonably challenging, but not like, I mean, right, the assessment has a variety of question levels, so all questions can be answered, and it's not too challenging, but also not too easy. And the second quote is, creating a scoring guide to use as you evaluate each student's response serves several purposes. It can be based on the standards for your grade and or subject, and it can make scoring more consistent and effective. So the reason that I highlighted this is because I feel like we've done a lot of reading about the harmful effects of rubrics and kind of forcing, I guess, in a way, students' work and their ability and their thinking into boxes, literally, and that seems very weird to me. So I just thought that, like, I understand the benefit of a scoring guide, especially I think it had just been talking about the speaking part of the assessment, but even then it's very challenging being a teacher, because you'll read one thing that says scoring guides are a great thing to have, and then you'll see another thing that says scoring guides are horrible, and you're forcing students into boxes. So it's very difficult to try to navigate that. But yeah. All right, so this was my Module 2 note-taking guide, response, and then some of the other things that I had missed. Thank you so much. Sorry this video is so long. Hopefully I'm able to speed it up and, I don't know, do something else while you listen to it. So thank you so much again for this accommodation and letting me just film a video all at once, and I'll get the Module 3 note-taking guide hopefully turned in later tonight. Thank you.